Hello. Let's see. Hey, welcome everyone. There we go. Can everyone hear me okay? Can anyone want to just say something in the chat? I'm checking out both Twitch and YouTube now. Perfect. Thank you, Dwayne. All right. Awesome. Thanks so much for letting me know. Uh, it's my second time streaming, first time streaming about CSS, and I guess I'll just jump into everything now. Hi, I'm Reggie Williams. I'm a developer and instructor here at Treehouse. Today we're going to learn about an awesome tool for writing CSS. I usually focus on JavaScript, as I mentioned, and this will be my first time really speaking about CSS live, especially in this format. So thank you all for joining. If you're returning Treehouse students, thanks for tuning back in. If this is your first time, stick around and learn with us. I'm looking forward to jumping into Tailwind a little bit today and talking about why I like it so much and why I think you might it might be a good idea to try it out in some of your CSS projects. So if you don't mind, if you want, you can mention where you're joining from today in the chat. I'm here in sometimes sunny Portland in the Pacific Northwest. We're getting a little bit of sun and a little bit of rain today. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat. We also have our amazing Treehouse staff moderating. So they'll keep an eye out for your questions. They'll look out for those. And I'll try to answer if I can. If not, I'll make time at the end to come back and answer some questions. All right, so if you're wondering what is Tailwind, Tailwind is a CSS framework. And a framework is really something, it's a bunch of code that's pre-written that makes your job as a developer easier. It's less code for you to write. This particular framework helps you to keep all your CSS in the HTML and really get started customizing and styling your pages pretty quickly once you're set up. So if you're newer to CSS or newer to development and haven't heard of frameworks before, you might see Sass, Bootstrap, other frameworks like that out there. And keep looking for those sorts of things because those will help you as a developer write code faster and be able to build more things. So Tailwind is just one of many frameworks. There's also libraries. And the difference there is really frameworks sort of dictate or tell you how to write the code within them. And libraries are things that you can include within your code most of the time. So why would we use Tailwind as opposed to Sass or something else? One of the main reasons I like it, I think it's really fast to get going, to use it, to add it into your code, and also as far as development. It's pretty small in production size, so any unused CSS is removed before the code is built out. You can also include those things like grid, the box, flexbox, because it includes utility classes for all those things. It includes classes to implement all those different things. So the grid, media queries, all those things are still possible with classes in Tailwind. There's also no need for that CSS file, as I mentioned before. You can write all of your CSS with classes in the HTML. So those are just a few things that I like about Tailwind. Another thing that I really like is the documentation. As far as documentation goes, it's pretty interactive and has some great examples of what you can do pretty quickly with some code samples there and throughout, so you can see the different sorts of things, all the capabilities of Tailwind, and not just the docs, not just sort of the intro docs, but you can quickly search for the different classes. So How Tailwind works is by adding classes to your HTML tags. So for instance, I want to change the color of something, the color of a text, a piece of text. So I'll look for that, and I'll see that we have these different text color classes, and they kind of change. The darkness goes up the higher the number is. So I'll keep that in mind. Imagine I want to find the height or set the height of something with CSS. Now we can see that there are different classes for height, and those first classes that are just height and a number, those are rims. We can also set the height in percentages, which I like as well, and that uses fractions, so the H dash fraction. And I like to say that it's pretty intuitive. Once you get pretty comfortable with Tailwind, you might be able to kind of guess some of the class names. We'll come back to that later. But yeah, let's really take off. And I mentioned that Tailwind is pretty fast. Another way that I think it's fast is that you're able to get up and running with it pretty quickly. So we won't jump into installation. This isn't a deep dive with Tailwind. We're just taking off. So we'll kind of talk about the playground. I'll talk about the playground now. So you can test all these things out. It has this built-in playground where you can write Tailwind code or write Tailwind and add classes to your HTML. But another place you can get up and running with Tailwind quickly is the code pin. So this project, I'll explain, was inspired sort of by what Tailwind makes me think about is I like to think of it as simple, and not to diminish anyone's efforts in learning it. I think all these things take time to learn, and there's a lot of concepts that I find that are difficult. I just mean as compared to other topics, and it's really built to help you out and simplify writing CSS. So it made me think of Saturday morning cartoons back in the day, and it's called Tailwind. So I thought of Tailspin, which was a cartoon I enjoyed. So this is sort of a LinkedIn card. Those that your LinkedIn where your profile picture goes if you're a LinkedIn user. And I just wanted to kind of customize some HTML and add in a little bit of style with it. So that is how this thing came about. And I'll go in and change all that stuff. But first, we'll start off with this, and we'll go in and start adding some of those Tailwind classes in, and our finished product will look something like that. And just really quickly on the installation, I mentioned I'm not going to jump into that today, but pretty quickly, you can get into that pretty quickly. The setup, you can get into the setup pretty quickly in the docs, depending on what you're using. If you're using React, if you're doing an Angular project, they have different options for all of those. So be sure to check out the docs. And how well do you need to know CSS to use Tailwind? That's a great question. I'd say to have a basic understanding of CSS. If you have a basic understanding of CSS, then you can really get going with Tailwind pretty quickly. You're using the same properties, you're setting the same properties. And if you've styled things with CSS, you can kind of shift those over. That's something I would challenge people to do, is if you have some existing projects, to take the CSS that you have written and try to write it in Tailwind. Anytime you're learning a new tool or something like this, that is a great way to get practice with it. Try building out sites that you really enjoy using. And think of strange LinkedIn cards and things like that to build as well. Anything where you can get some practice, and that's really what we want to do today. So if you've used CodePen before, it's a great in-browser editor where you can I like to test out CSS. If I'm doing anything that's just HTML and CSS, I like to test it out here. Learning or playing around with the grid, I feel like it's a great place to try those things out. So you'll go in, and I already have my HTML written, so I don't completely bore everyone writing the HTML today. We'll focus on CSS, and we'll search for external style sheets, and I'll type Tailwind. Now that adds Tailwind CSS into our project. And I'll save and close that. That's perfect. The first thing I want to do, I think here is set the colors. It's pretty plain, and I think I can do that pretty quickly. So I want to set the background color, and I want to give it a little bit of style and also showcase one of the things that we can do in Tailwind. So I can set a gradient for this background, and I want to go from left to right. I kind of want to fade it. So I'll use this class BG gradient to L. Actually, I want to use to right since we're going from left to right. So I'll use this class here. And then I'll see that I also need some colors to go from. So I can start from, this image starts from middle of the mid shade yellow, not too dark, not too light, kind of in the middle, the same with the red, and it fades into that pink over there. And I just want to go from a darker red to a lighter red. So I'll go back to that CodePen project. And in this first div, I'll add a class BG gradient. Gotta watch out for those spelling errors in your CSS, or I would have written, or in your HTML. And I'll say from red 500 and to red 400. There we go. So it gives me that gradient that I was looking for. And instead of, writing out a CSS declaration in a class, I can do this all here in one spot, really. And I'll just check the chat from time to time to see if any other questions pop up. So if you have them, ask them. And again, I'll try to come back at the end. Okay, the next section, I have sort of that card section. I want to make that yellow. And I'll try background yellow 200. I'll go with the lighter yellow for that. Okay, and right now the positioning is off. I'll really get to that next. But first, these buttons, I also want to give them a background. And again, background black. Let's see, does that work? Yeah, that's okay, that works. But now I can't see my button text at all because the text is black. Anyone have any ideas or want to jump into the chat? Does anyone remember one of those properties from earlier? I'll give it a sec. Let's see. We'll jump back into the Tailwind docs, text color, and it is just that, text color. So let's go with the text color of white. Oops. There we go. And you never have to memorize anything. Google, use the docs as much as you can. I forgot the property name going from one browser to the other. So let's see. Text white. And when you can use these shortcuts like this, both of the buttons are going to have the same styling. So I'll always put the same classes in both of those buttons. I want to remove, just add it there. Okay, perfect. For colors, the colors are where I want them to be. Still got some work to do with this positioning. And I mentioned earlier that you can use all those different things like grid within here. So that's definitely what I want to do. But first, this div here isn't big enough for me. So let's go to height. Are there any settings that I can use to make it the width or the height of the full screen? There we go. So this is the same thing as 100. View height in CSS. We'll add H screen to this main div so it covers up the entire screen here. And we're not making a CSS masterpiece here today. We're just trying out some different things with with Tailwind, and I encourage you to do the same and just experiment with this, build off of this, or build off of some of your own things as well. Then this card class is really going to be where we'll organize the rest of the page. So let's make it a grid container. If you're not familiar with grid yet, we have some awesome courses on grid as well on Treehouse. It's another way to help you write your CSS faster. It has some kind of some built-in constraints to really get going. So we'll give it 8 rows. The way this is going to work, those rows are from top to bottom in this grid, and the content here is going to be organized really within the middle 4 rows. There will be 2 rows at the top and 2 rows at the bottom that don't have any content or just for spacing. So that'll have 8 grid rows, 8 rows in there. And as you see, it's already changed the layout of this a bit, but not exactly what we want it to be. And I don't want this card to be as wide as the screen. So let's change the width. Can anyone guess in the chat what the width property might be? We know that the height is H. How can we set width here? I'm just going to go with W. And I remember that there are those fractions. So I'll try 4/5. Will that do it? Okay. And I want that centered. And I know I can do that with margins. And just like height and width, it's just a single letter for margin. So I'm guessing margin auto will be M auto. There we go. Okay, and the next thing I really want to do after this, we have the color, the grid is set up, is really start lining things up in the grid where they go, placing them in the right order. So I have an image. And that's just a picture of me somewhere in the Columbia River Gorge. And I'll change that to my name. The details are important. All right, that image class, we'll give it a class of, since it's a grid item and we want it to start at that second row, or at the, yeah, we'll just, let's make it start there. So again, that row start to, that tells us to start our grid row here. And again, we're just adding classes, more and more classes to style. The next thing I'll do is start this div at row 3 with my name and title. Then I have the buttons next. Start that at row 4. And the last button at row 5. There we go. And it's getting a little bit closer, one step at a time, to that original, or to what I'm trying to build out. And look at this. There's nothing there. So let's give us a little bit more room. Give ourselves a little bit more room, right? So I think another thing I could do, I can make the horizontal margin auto there. And then I'll pick the vertical margin. Oops. Well, let's leave that off for now. I know I do want this image to be rounded. So how can I do that? Let's see. And I also want it to be centered. So I know that to center an image, or to center something, I can set the margin to auto. There we go. What about rounded corners? There we go, border radius. So I can set the border radius with the class rounded full. There we go. And I'll give it a height of 32, width 32, just because I'll need to keep that even. And let's see. Now these buttons, I also want to do the same thing, but not as rounded. I like that pill shape for the buttons. So, all right, let's see. There's also the rounded mid value, and I'll give that a try. I like that for the buttons as well. Or medium, I guess. Okay. But at the same time, those buttons are still huge and stretch across the screen, and it's not really what we want our buttons to look like. So what if that's a little bit shorter? We'll keep working on these buttons. But for now, I'll copy those classes again from one button to the next. So those at least match. And we want these to be, let's see, inline elements, I believe, too. So now let's see. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. Another thing, we can set the font, just like any other CSS property. And I'll give the whole document this font, this monospaced font, by just adding that class. There we go. All right, so yeah, there are quite a few classes still to add there, but as you can see, all this styling is done with just Tailwind, with those classes. There's nothing that needs to be written in your CSS file. Those classes, again, are pretty intuitive. You can start to figure those out once you've had practice with them. So again, give it a try. Try adding it to projects that you've already started or are working on. We're running short, a little bit short on time today, so I want to open up a little bit of time for questions, and also take another look at any questions that were previously asked in the chat. So I see a question that's asking, is it possible to use Tailwind in a project which is already using Bootstrap? And I say you definitely would want to go about it with just one way, or pick one of those really. So I'd say to try it out and see which one you prefer, but you definitely want to pick one. You can replace what you have in Bootstrap and do all those same things with Tailwind. I believe there's even some like pre-styled components, just as there is in Bootstrap and Tailwind as well. And I see Sal, great guest over there on Twitch. Thanks, Sal, Dwayne, everyone, Orion, all of you for interacting and joining those in the chat over there. Any other questions, comments, thoughts about CSS? All right. Well, yeah, I mentioned we're sort of running a little bit short on time. We're almost at the end of this half-hour period, but thank you all for joining. If you're new to Treehouse, if you learned something, be sure to like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and hang out and learn more with us. I'll be back on some of these doing more live streams. If you have ideas for topics, please reach out to us on social. We're at Team Treehouse on everything. Sign up at teamtreehouse.com if you're new here again. And also, if you're interested in learning more about development, if you're an aspiring developer, we have the Treehouse Festival coming up June 7th through 11th, where we'll have some awesome speakers from both within Treehouse and outside of our organization on a range of topics, from development to getting hired in tech. So be sure to check that out. It's free. Register today, and we'll make sure that there's a link in this video in the description. Let's see. I see another question. Great question, Anwar. Let's see. I've really mostly used Tailwind for like side projects and experimenting, really. So I haven't seen the HTML get out of hand, but I think that can be a possibility. So just like with anything, I would say to consider your project. If you have a larger project, then this HTML might get unwieldy, or might get a little bit difficult to keep up with all those things. But I think for the most part, I haven't had to overload the HTML of classes yet in instances. And let's see. Another question: Tailwind over Bootstrap. I haven't necessarily compared the two, and my Bootstrap is definitely a little rusty, so I'll make sure to come back in the comments. I'll come back around and answer that question. But same, we're using those utility classes. I think they're both utility class based, where you're adding classes, and I think there may be different classes and different constraints in place with both of those. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Thanks for joining and making the time and taking the time today. Again, be sure to join us at the Treehouse Festival from June 7th through 11th. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all there and doing some more of these streams. Again, if you have topics, please reach out and leave comments. Any feedback, I'm always looking for feedback and happy to help how I can. So, yeah, thank you for joining. Keep up all the great work. Thanks, Anwar. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, happy learning. Keep up all the great work, and I'll see you all soon.